Hey, welcome to Hot Takes. I'm your host, James Scott, here to analyze anything and everything interesting. Let's dig into today's topics.
So, James, I remember the first time we ever met. I mean, obviously via Zoom because this whole thing's crazy right now. So obviously the first time we met was via Zoom, and you immediately started telling me I don't know baseball that well, and you are amazing at baseball, and you know everything about baseball.
Thank you. I appreciate
And
it.
you started telling me because I love drama. I don't love to be inside drama. I love to observe drama. So you started telling me about this scandal that the Astros had in terms of cheating. And you decided that was going to be our first episode.
It's a great topic to talk about. Most baseball fans know this. The Astros used this camera system that they hooked up in center field to get the signs that catchers were putting down, so that their batters would know what pitches were coming. They used this with a coordination team up in their tunnel, and the team would make audible sounds, reportedly using a trash can, and this would alert the batter of what pitch was coming. And if you know what pitch is coming, you can be a significantly better hitter.
Mm-hmm.
And like a lot of teams reported the Astros for doing this. Some people who were formerly of the Astros organization jumped onto other organizations and kind of adapted versions of this in subsequent years. But it was it is the major scandal, in my opinion, in baseball, because whereas the steroid scandal era
Mm-hmm.
was affecting many players throughout the game on every single team, this was one team being specifically affected. Not only were they affected, they won the World Series with this. And beyond that, like no team has ever cheated and won the World Series.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you
Or
can.
cheated on this level. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, you had this good flow going. I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're good. You're good.
But on this level, because when you explained
Yes.
it to me, it's like it's well beyond steroids, because it's
Yeah.
like it's
Yeah. I mean, with steroids, you can have one or two players that are juicing up their bodies and they're working out so hard that they hit a few extra homers here and there, but you don't have a team knowing what pitches are coming. Like you can hit a home run knowing what pitch is coming more often than you hit a home run just because you're a little bit stronger, And it's just one team being affected, and the reason why, like, I say this is so much worse than
mm-hmm.
any sort of previous cheating is because, like, you could take it 100 years back. The 1919 Black Sox scandal. That's what they call it, the Black Sox scandal. It was the Chicago White Sox, and they darkened the game. They brought, darkness upon the game by disgracing the game, by cheating in the World Series. They threw the World Series reportedly so that they would gain a whole bunch of money. They'd lose these games, lose the World Series, but they'd be rich in the process. And I mean, most of the players on that team were banned for life. Like Shoeless Joe Jackson, like one of the greatest players of all time. Babe Ruth modeled his swing after Jackson, was banned for life. So even at tracing it back to that, that's terrible for cheating, right? But they lost the World Series. They didn't win the World Series. The Astros won the World Series in 2017 doing this. And there are a lot of people out there who are like, oh, the cheating only affected their numbers here and there. There was no real evidence that it affected games. But by the end of what we talk about here, there is evidence. We have evidence. So yeah, should I just launch into that?
I mean, I would just
Or
not the evidence just yet. Not the evidence just
yeah.
yet. Let's talk more about the hitters. So you talked a lot.
Oh yes. So
Yeah, let's talk.
this is a very important thing to understand, and we're going to be talking about this concept over and over again in different
Mm-hmm.
forms throughout our podcasting, because this is just frankly hitter development. And when it comes to hitter development, what usually happens is you have a hitter who is athletic and aggressive, and they swing at everything. And as they get a better idea of what they can hit and the strike zone, and what pitches look like. Oh, that's because it spins that way. That's a curveball. So I'm going to wait a little bit longer to start my swing. As they get better and better, they'll swing at less, or their swing frequency will go down across zone in general. And the more that they dial in their swing towards the zone, and the more kinetic their swing is, athletic and coordinated, then the more they'll be able to hit for power. And at some point, they'll just be able to, ideally, if they're good enough, they'll just be able to hit the pitches in the zone and around the edges of the zone as well, and will lay off all the pitches otherwise. They'll be able to hit the ones that are in there for power and frequently, like not just occasional power, just whatever's thrown in there, they're hitting. And they'll lay off the pitches outside the zone, so they'll get their walks at that point in time. But after a player reaches their peak within the zone and within the edges of the zone, then they won't be able to hit the edges of the zone, and they'll be hitting what's in the zone. And then it'll be they can't hit the low and away pitch, so they have to spoil pitches, or they can't hit the high pitch, so they have to foul it off, and that's what happens as the player starts to reach their decline phase. And when they're in that phase, they become what I call a mistake hitter, meaning a hitter who gets the majority of their damage done against when a pitcher makes a mistake and throws you, a breaking ball that doesn't break, or a 91-mile-an-hour fastball with no hop in it, straight down the middle. That's a mistake pitch. And when you're at that stage of your career, you'll still walk because you're not swinging at balls. And you can foul off enough pitchers' pitches to still be effective, eventually getting to a more hittable pitch and hitting it for power. But at that stage of your career, you can only sustain that for so long. And eventually, you're really just waiting for a pitch that you can crush, and you'll have trouble versus a lot of the other pitches. And then you start to end your career. You start to leave the game, because who wants a player who's only effective if the pitcher makes a mistake right down the middle, So with a lot of these players on the Astros, with the next section that we will be discussing, a lot of them have basically overnight went from the most basic form of a hitter to the most realized version of a hitter, almost past that, where they're fully dependent on mistake pitches and or their athletic ability in combination with just that approach to even be effective. And once you really start breaking down, especially this season, it just really shows that this team was utterly dependent on this system to be above average players. Some of these guys, not a lot of people remember this because awards are kind of separate from these types of issues.
Yeah.
But Altuve won an MVP award under this, cheating system. And he won it over a very, very good season from Aaron Judge. Now, I'm a Yankee fan, so I have to bring up, all things being said, if I'm speaking about, giving Aaron Judge credit there, but people lost MVPs. I don't think Aaron Judge is ever going to have another year like that. Just being objective. I'd love it. But you got to understand, on an individual level, this affects so many other things. The Dodgers could have won the World Series that year. The Yankees could have won the World Series that year. What does Oakland think? Because Oakland had a couple of good years during, the system, and they're in the same division. What happens if, without that system, Oakland wins the division? So Tampa Bay Rays, they got eliminated with the Astros using this system. So all these other teams, maybe they make it farther. It affected so much more than just now we can't tell moving forward if any sort of World Series are legitimate. It affected individual players' careers. It affected other teams. And there are legitimately, there's a few articles written out there that some of the pitchers that they used this system against are out of baseball. They had a couple of really bad games against the Astros. Their team sent them down to the minors, and for one reason or another, they never really recovered, and their careers are over. Um, so yeah, this affected a lot of people. This affected a lot of people. And then like you think, if Altuve was really not as good as we thought, like if he was not, wouldn't guys like Miles Straw get more at bats, or wouldn't JD Davis have been getting at bats for the Astros? Or so even guys who should have been playing for the Astros, they've been stunted. Their careers have been stunted to a certain degree, and now they're having to get it going elsewhere. So it affected so much in the game. And what was their consequence, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really the next thing that we got to talk about, because they didn't get any consequence. I mean, they did. They got a slap on the wrist, basically. The GM was banned for like a year. The manager was banned for a year. No consequences were handed down to the players. Certain employees were fired that like helped send the players the information about what pitches were coming. But their manager that got fired for a year, that got suspended for a year, that year's come and passed. The manager is now the manager of the Detroit Tigers. Yes, another major league organization gave the guy a job after this. Like, and I'll tell you, like, Alex Cora, that's another guy who Alex Cora is the Red Sox manager right now. He was suspended for a year from the same scandal for the same reasons, and they just rehire him just like that. It makes me as a baseball fan, like, not only like, sick to my stomach to see this, but really worried, because like, what other organizations think that they can find a way to cheat in this kind of way, right? But like not get caught, like the whole reason that the Astros got caught was like on video, you have like audible sounds of them like using the system. And then they have like, when the Astros won the World Series, they had like dugout camera footage of them going through the tunnel. And you could see the station was set up right there for them to do the system, like with everything. Like it was obvious that they were doing it. I think it was something along the lines of, I think a friend of mine told me like 20 something teams over the course of a few years reported the Astros particularly for doing this, and Major League Baseball just basically sat on their hands.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been just under 20. It might have been like 19 teams, but like a ton just reported the Astros for doing this, and Major League Baseball actually did nothing. I know it was at least 5 teams that reported it, but I'm thinking from what my friend said, it's a lot more than that. It was closer to like 20. I want to verify that though. That being said, like if you have that many teams reporting a team for doing this kind of cheating, and you as a commissioner do nothing, and then they're caught for it, and you hand down no punishments whatsoever. I mean, I have a huge issue with Rob Manfred for that, and I think that honestly deserves its own podcast, because Rob Manfred has been doing a lot of different things with the game. He's changed a lot of rules, so I think we'll have to record on that a different day for sure. But this, I mean,
that's really funny that you bring up because you bring up consequences, and it's
yeah.
like, because like the thing is, I think what's so crazy about this whole scandal is that like they did get caught cheating. They did. Their people would not have been suspended. There wouldn't like there wouldn't have been scenarios like that if there was no cheating involved. So it's really funny for you. I don't even know about the again, this is what makes me a horrible person at knowing sports.
You're good, man.
You say that the White Sox scandal, they wound up getting banned for life, some of the players.
Yeah.
And it's like, so how is it, and it's crazy to me, it's actually really crazy, and it shows you how times have changed, how you can not only get away with cheating, but with little to no consequences nowadays.
Well, what's really wild, and I'm absolutely ecstatic that you brought that up, because I totally would have forgotten to mention this, but a couple of years ago in the Atlanta Braves system, I believe the guy's name was like John Coppola or something like that. He was the GM of the team.
Mm-hmm.
And they did this crazy international draft where they got like some crazy big bats. They got Kevin Maton specifically, and he was like this international guy that was supposed to be, the next Miguel Cabrera. All these international guys are always the next Cabrera, and he was supposed to be like, he was supposed to be that 40 homer hitter, bats 300. He gained a whole bunch of weight after signing, and he's nothing's been the same for him. I hope he pans out, but what ended up happening was Major League Baseball found out that the reason why the Braves were able to sign so many people was because there was a lot of backroom negotiating, whether it be in Cuba or Dominican Republic, with a lot of these agents, and a lot of these agents were connected to like the mafia and these underground services. So they want like exclusive like negotiating rights, but to get teams want the exclusive negotiating rights rather, but to get it from these underground mafia guys, sometimes they have to pay behind the scenes to get these kind of exclusive negotiating rights. So that's what was going on with regards to the Braves, and the dude got banned for life. The GM got banned for life. This guy, I'm pretty sure his name's John Coppola. And he got banned for that. He didn't get banned for like illegally winning a World Series by stealing signs and knowing what pitches were coming. He got banned for life for negotiating, with 15-year-old, draft picks, agents. Like, that's what got him banned for life. Like, what? And no one in the Astros scandal gets banned for life. Like, that just makes no sense to me.
I think that's what like is really crazy to me. That is because it gets better every time we talk about this. It just gets better to me because it's like there's just more information you throw at me, and I'm just like, dude, like, what happened? Like, what fell through the cracks here? And I think it was really crazy when the first time we actually talked about this, when you said, I forgot how you phrased it, but it was really funny to me. It was like really interesting and really funny. But you said to me that they were like, hey, we have to come up with a way to figure out like what the pitchers are going to be like. And it's like that whoever was in charge was like, yo, we're just going to set up cameras. And it's just like, who signed off on that? Like, who? I don't know. Like who said, yo, that's a great idea. Like, fantastic idea.
There has to be someone who was just like, yes, that. But like, honestly, what's the craziest part about this is like when you look at the Astros strategy for bringing in talent, like what they're like, as soon as because the Astros went through a couple of years where they sucked. Like their whole strategy was, we're going to lose 100 games like 3 or 4 years in a row so that we can get the best draft picks in the draft so that we can rebuild our system faster. But everyone that they went after, like outside of, the obvious first round picks for being, loaded with talent. But everyone they went after, like Josh Reddick in recent years, Michael Brantley, Yuli Gurriel out of Cuba, like all these guys that they were going after, they were specifically going after contact bats. So what do you think happens when you have a contact bat and you tell them what pitch is coming? You see what I'm saying? So this might have been something that actually was in play from the very beginning of them trying, to come up with things. Because I remember when like they were, the Astros won the World Series. Look how smart they are and everything. And, this is what their GM did. Their GM, like he met with the owner and apparently the meeting went so well and he blew the owner away to such a degree that he was hired on the spot. And I'm like, I wonder if like he, was like, hey, we'll set up cameras so that like our contact hitters know what pitches are coming. So that, I wonder if that was discussed. Like if that was.
But that's what I'm saying. That's what cracks me up. Is just like, yo, like who sat down in a meeting and was like, listen, man, we're just gonna put cameras all over the place and we're gonna do this thing where we bang stuff so that you know what pitch is coming, and then all of our players are just gonna be so great at the game. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be amazing. God. And just like they just sat there and they were like, yo, sign off on it. You got the job. Get it done.
Yeah.
Like
basically, like that's honestly what it seemed like. Like I just like and then this is the best part about it all. It's like, oh no, we got caught. and then nothing happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, oh, okay, I guess, we'll just, do it differently next time. Like, reportedly, they started doing it with whistles. Like that's what the teams are like saying now. Like in this last postseason, they're saying that you can hear whistling from the tunnel. If it's one whistle, it's a fastball. If it's two whistles, it's a curve.
Dude, that's
Like
just dude.
there was another report that said that like there was the bullpen coach or the bullpen catcher. If it was a fastball, like they'd not put any hands on like the fence. But if it was like a curveball, they'd have one hand over the fence. And if it was like, a changeup, like off speed, they'd have two hands. Like think about that for a second. Like if you have the pitching coach doing it now in the outfield, like it just makes you think like how many other ways can they find a way to like mess with this? Because clearly these people got no consequence. And they won the World Series. So it's just like, what are they going to do? Are they going to have like a blinking light out there? Or is it just going to be like, when it's a curveball, that one fan sitting in that seat, they're going to turn to their left. Like, what? Like, like, I don't know. It makes baseball seem so illegitimate, especially since there's no consequences. What's to stop anyone from continuing this, doing their own version? It makes me feel very uncomfortable. But I feel almost like we should now launch into like what happened with their players, at least the main year of the cheating.
Yeah, so talk about it. Talk about their
Yeah.
players.
So we know, like we guaranteed know that they cheated in 2017. Okay. And 27, we know what they cheated in the same method in 2018. After part of 2018, it gets a little bit unclear, but that's when, reportedly we have the whistling system where they got no consequences for it whatsoever. But they got punished specifically for 2017, although why they didn't get punished for subsequent years or, looked into for the whistling or any of that, I don't know. I mean, they said they did look into it, but like quite literally there's video that John Boy Media, credit to him, put out there on YouTube where you can hear the whistles. So, you tell me. You go check that out and you tell me. But specifically looking at how they cheated, I think it's very apparent that the cheating was like all the time in 2017. But come 2018, come 2019, I'm of the belief that they used the cheating to stay under the radar, to make sure that they weren't getting caught because so many teams were reporting them. They used it specifically when like runners were on second, runner on third, tie game, 1-run difference after the 7th inning. Like maybe there was a lefty on the mound and you had a bunch of righties up at the plate. You have that kind of platoon advantage. You can hit a home run fairly easy if you know what pitches are coming. So I think that's at least what my hypothesis was entering into, my own research. I've heard people talk about that, the cheating changed the numbers, and I've seen infographics and like, photos and memes or whatever, but I don't think I've ever seen anybody actually have like a video or a podcast where they actually brought up the numbers, like, and just talked about how ridiculous the difference is. So during that year, the main year, 2017, they had Carlos Beltran at DH and they had Brian McCann at catcher, who subsequently both retired. Beltran was hired during this whole process as the manager of the Mets, but then he had to step down as soon as the cheating allegations and all of it were brought up, because obviously he would have been suspended. I think he actually might have been suspended for a year, just like the rest of them. But McCann, as somebody who was out of the game, he received no consequences either. Looking at specifically the players who continued to play rather than the ones who retired after this, let's start with Marwin Gonzalez. He's their super utility, probably one of the least interesting players on that team. He's a guy who in previous years had played for the Astros, and he went on to play for the Twins in 2019 and last year in 2020. In 2019, he had the juiced ball working for him. Decent hitter that year, not the greatest, but decent for a super utility. Right around league average. This year, without the juiced ball, he was 34% below league average. Pretty terrible. But you put him on the Astros in 2018, where they were occasionally using the cheating, and all of a sudden he's 3% above league average. But perhaps a little bit more impactful, the year before, the main year of the cheating, 2017, he was 44% above league average. 44% above league average is a middle of the order hitter. You'd expect that from your number 3 hitter. You'd expect that from your number 4 hitter. You'd expect that from somebody named like Chris Bryant or Nolan Arenado or Juan Soto or Christian Yelich or Giancarlo Stanton. And he's doing it. Marwin Gonzalez is doing it. Meanwhile, the next year, he drops off by 41 percentage points. Yeah, he goes from being 44% above league average to being what's essentially like an 8-hole hitter or a 9-hole hitter or a bench player, which is essentially what he is. So that's how far he fell off. He fell off by nearly 45%, 41%, 40%. I'll just say 40%. I'm not going to round down because it's, yeah. So 40%, he fell off by 40%, just year to year. Let's go to their center fielder, who was mainly there to look. They moved guys around, but he's the main guy that they'd have late game. His name's Jake Marisnick. He can't hit. Last year, he came off the bench for the Mets, and while striking out 30% of the time and only walking 3%, he actually had a great year. But the underlying numbers show that none of it is legitimate. And given that it was only in 34 plate appearances, which is, even less, it's 33 at bats, because plate appearance, you can come up to the plate but not finish the at bat. Now it could be taking place at second base or whatever. Point is that he's never really been a good hitter outside of this very small 2020 sample size, and outside of 2017 when he was with the cheating Astros, where the year before he's 40% below league average, and the year after he's a good 16% below league average. But that year he's 17% above league average. By far the best numbers of his career. They'd actually be tremendous numbers in general for a center fielder at all. Like he's putting up great numbers in terms of base running. He's putting up great numbers in terms of power hitting inside park, outside the park. He's actually, he didn't do too well that year in terms of the DEF, in terms of that type of number. But I do know his UZR, which is a higher defensive number we'll get into later, was excellent. So he was a very good defender overall during those years. I'm not going to count against him because he just had that one statistic out of whack, but he was 17% above league average, where usually he's 17% below league average. It's a good, 32% difference. That's a huge difference in performance. And so that's the second player with a huge drop. The first player was a 40% difference. This is a 30% difference. Okay, well, let's move on to the player who's seen the least drop. And he's now not on the Astros anymore, which makes me supremely happy. At least I don't think they're going to re-sign him. And that's George Springer. Now, I think a good amount of reason that Springer was able to do as well as he is that he's by far the most athletic guy on that team. So if any of them was going to be able to take their previous performance and translate it, at least in some sort of version, it was going to be him. He could play center field, play right field, faster than most of the guys on the team. Definitely more of a power hitter just from launch angle. His ISO, which is an out of play power ranking or statistic, really, it dropped from basically 300 to 275. So not too much of a drop. But his in-play success, aka non-mistakes, pitches on the edge of the strike zone, breaking balls, all of that type of stuff, his batting average dropped from 292 to 265. he was able to drop his strikeout rate by a good 3%, which is nice. But his walk rate also dropped by a good percent. So his numbers in total dropped by about 10% if we're looking at WRC plus. That's the smallest drop of all of them. And it's still, in my opinion, a significant drop, because if you're looking at percentage wise, he dropped by 10%. But if you're looking at type of performance, he is now not hitting nearly enough versus pitchers' pitches. He's only hitting pitches that he'd be capable of hitting for power. That being said, he's really capitalizing on all of them. Any of those types of pitches, he is hitting for power. He's not missing on them. So you got to give him credit where credit is due. But as a free agent, he's not an Astro anymore. And I've heard he's looking for a $150 million contract. And you know what? I think he's going to get it. I think he's worth it. So not all doom and gloom for Astros players during that time. But I will also mention this. That's just from 2019 to 2020. If we're looking like we did for Marisnik and for Marwin, and this is one of the main reasons I wanted to talk about this guy, if we're looking from 2017 to 2018, his numbers dropped by 22%, which is a much bigger difference than just a little 10% drop. He just took a big leap forward the next year, which is a year where I am absolutely convinced that they cheated by using a whistling system. So to move on to the next player, their right fielder, Josh Reddick. Reddick has always been a personal favorite of mine. So it sucked when, the cheating was found out, and I had to kind of start hating him, just to be honest. I know it's funny to say it, but before that point in his career, he was a guy who could rob home runs. He had a high batting average for a lefty, a real beautiful swing. He was just like a grinder. He was one of those types of guys where you would have loved to have him in the bottom third in your lineup. And, you trust him in the field, you trust him on the bases, and you trust him at the plate. Nothing flashy, but steady. And I like that from a player. And if you look at his numbers, in 2017, he had the best year of his career. He was 27%. 27%. That's middle of the order numbers. Maybe not quite number 3 hitter or number 4 hitter, but number 5 hitter numbers. Not number 6 hitter numbers, which is more edge of middle of the order, like actual number 5 hitter, middle of the order numbers. Middle of the order for me is 2 to 5. Especially like the new metrics say that the number 2 spot in the lineup is one of the most valuable. So I'm absolutely fine, including that in the middle of the order. It just means that leadoff types who can hit are technically middle of the order. But to get back to Reddick, 27% above league average the year of the cheating, 2017, the main year at least. The next year, he was 1% below league average. The drop in performance for him was 28%, almost 30%. So drastic drop. His batting average before, 314. His batting average after, 242. I mean, I can get into more statistics than that, but I think that's all I need to say. So the next player, the Cuban Derek Jeter, that's what they called him when he was coming over, and they were trying to, sell him on his talents and how good he was, even though he was like a 33-year-old or a 31-year-old, something like that, coming over from Cuba, and not like exactly a guy who was supposed to hit for too much power. His first 36 games, he was very meh. He was 16% below league average in 2016. 2017, though, when you have him knowing what pitches are coming, all of a sudden he's 18% above league average. The next year, he drops by a full 11%, which, granted isn't as much as you'd think. But when the cheating comes back in 2019, he's 32% above league average. Well, guess what happens without the cheating in 2020? He's, what's that? That's 21% below league average. That means if you're combining from 2019 to 2020, his numbers dropped by 53%. That's insane.
That's a lot.
He halved himself. Like that's That's terrible. Like that, I'm telling you, the fact that all of these hitters are experiencing these drops, this is enough evidence. This is all you need. But here's the best part. I haven't even gotten to the three main guys: Alex Bregman, Carlos Correa, and Jose Altuve. You know what? I think I'll do Altuve for last because I mentioned him earlier. I mentioned how he took Aaron Judge's MVP away from him. I think given what happened to Altuve, I'll address him last. I'll go with Bregman first because Bregman legitimately put up a decent year last year. And also you have to remember that Bregman's rookie year was 2017, so he was going to progress. But if you're looking at from when the cheating stopped, which I think for most of their guys, they stopped doing, like, okay, some of their guys they won't really be using the system with as much after 2017. I think I addressed this. They use the system when the game is on the line. Well, you think they'd also use the system when the game is on the line and the best hitters are at the plate. Like maybe you have three guys coming to the plate, right? And maybe two of them are Josh Reddick and Yuli Gurriel. And then you turn the lineup over and you have Springer coming up. So maybe you'd use it with Springer, or if you have Bregman coming up, you use it with Bregman because of how good of a hitter Bregman is. Mm-hmm. Or you get the idea. So I think especially with the whistling system, I think Bregman was definitely using it. But if I needed any evidence to really show, his rookie year, he was 23% above league average. The next 2 years, he was like 60% above league average. And then last year, without the cheating, he was once again 22% above league average. Basically the same numbers as his rookie year, except 40% lower batting average because, of course, he's not capable of. Yes, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But like, if we really want to like hammer the point home, last season, 2019, he was 68% above league average. That's some Mike Trout stuff. But in 2020, he was 22% above league average. It's a 46% drop. So don't get me wrong, 22% above league average. I'd love to have somebody in the 6th spot or in the 7th spot who's doing that. And if you're getting that performance out of a middle infield spot or third base even, that's fine. But given that he doesn't give you anything on the bases, he's average on defense, and that he's only going to be hitting against pitchers, or not pitchers' pitches, pitchers' mistakes rather than pitchers' pitches. It plays down rather than up. For instance, if you have a hitter who's 22% above league average, right? And it's an aggressive profile, and they have a lot of success on balls in play, and they're not really striking out that much, that's going to hit elite pitchers. But with this, that's dependent on mistakes. It's not. So the 22 versus this guy's 22 will play probably more like a 11, whereas an aggressive hitter, it might play as a 33. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does.
So, because this is just dealing with how much your numbers say you're above average or below average. It's not telling you whether your approach allows you to hit tougher pitchers. So, yeah, that's Bregman. Fell off from last year to this year by 46%. Now we have Carlos Correa, who's like the loudmouth of the team. Like if Bregman's the closest to being respectable, Carlos Correa is just kind of a jerk. I mean, like, imagine if you lose the World Series, right? The Dodgers lost the World Series in 2017 to the Astros. And then imagine if you're a player on that team and you're like, yeah, they cheated. We should have won the World Series that year. It is what it is. And then imagine being somebody on the Astros and publicly not only calling out the player who called you out for cheating, but cursing him out in an interview on live television. That's Carlos Correa. He did that. You can look that up. He's like a legitimately terrible human being. Like I've seen him slap the ball out of people's gloves, like vintage A-Rod when A-Rod was terrible. I'm glad that A-Rod grew up. That's a conversation for another day too. It's a great story. I've seen Carlos Correa like legitimately run out of the baseline to like deliberately get like people to make errors. Like he has no chill. Like it's Bush League level stuff. Like he'll do whatever it takes to win, and he won't care. He'll rub it in your face because he won. It's terrible. It's literally like, are you 4 years old? You know what I mean? It's like you'd expect that from like a middle schooler or something like that. Like we've all played like middle school dodgeball, and there's always that like middle schooler who complains because like the ball didn't touch me, it just touched my shirt. Like, dude, like that's just the grown up entitled version of that, you know? That's Carlos Correa. I
Grown up
hate.
entitled and cheating version.
Yeah, exactly. Like, dude, I hate this guy. I do. I hate him. So, all right, he's a great player, all right, but I hate him. I wish I had his ability. I don't wish I. Well, I actually do have his back. I was about to say I don't wish I had his back, and then I'm like, oh yeah, but my back's terrible too. So, yeah. So, all right. Anyway, in 2017, Carlos Correa was 52% above league average. The next year, he was league average. So he dropped off by 52%. When the system kicked back up in 2019, he now was once again above average, but this time it was by 43%. So he wasn't as good at the cheating, I guess. And then you come back to 2020 without the cheating, where the consequences have come in and everybody's watching you. And he goes from 43% above league average to 3% below league average. So a 46% drop. But just because I hate Carlos Correa and I really want to drive the point home, whereas, Alex Bregman, and I could have mentioned this when we went over Bregman, Alex Bregman tailed off significantly in the second half. He was about a league average hitter. So even that 22% above league average that we discussed doesn't really properly explain how bad Bregman got. The 3% below league average that Correa is showing us doesn't quite explain how bad Correa got, because his first month of the season, which granted was 5 games, Correa was 107% above league average. He was nuts. But if we're going to look at it first half to second half of this year, Carlos Correa in the second half of this season was 35% below league average. If he did that over the course of a full year, that means his numbers would have dropped. What's that? 78%. His numbers would have fallen off 78% without the cheating. Oh my God. This is the first time I actually calculated that. I'm a little blown away here.
That's a lot. That's
78%. 78%. You go from 43% above league average to 35% below league average. That is, wow. I'm blown away. I mean, I don't want to just be this blown away for this much longer, because I'm just going to be quiet and we'll just be dead silent for the rest of the podcast. But like that's really a significant number. So okay, let's move on. So the guy who won the MVP in 2017, Jose Altuve, he was 60% above league average that year. The next year, his numbers dropped off by 26%. So a decent amount for sure, but not as drastic as some of the other guys. But when the Astros were found out officially for cheating after the 2019 season, in which he was 38% above league average, I thought Altuve, just like the rest of them, the numbers would drop off a bit. I was not prepared for Altuve over the course of a full season, whereas Correa, he had a terrible year, and it got worse as the season went on. And in the second half of the year, he was 35% below league average. But again, that's the second half. He still had that beginning of the year that was pretty decent. Well, Altuve over the course of the entire year last year was 23% below league average, which when you add it to how much above league average he was the year before, he was 60. It's a 61% difference, 61% drop. The sample size there is legitimate. I mean, he's not the kind of guy. Well, look, when you have guys who have big second halves, they're never these aggressive hitters. They're always guys who, because of how hard they swing, it takes them a bit for their swing to be, fundamentally, mechanically, absolutely on point each time when they swing. So at the beginning of the year, there'll be a lot of pop-ups. There'll be a lot of ground balls. This especially happens to switch hitters who mainly have killer second halves and work up to it over the course of a month or 2 months at the beginning of the year. But it also happens to basically anyone who's got ridiculous swing speed at point of impact, like Aaron Judge or Matt Chapman, or there's a lot of these guys. So I wouldn't expect a guy like Altuve to be a second half hitter. He kind of is going to be the guy where, like, if he's cold for a bit, he'll be cold for a week, and then he'll be hot for the rest of the year, or he'll be different versions of hot for the rest of the year. But as the kind of hitter he is, you'd expect him to be consistent. I mean, this is a guy who batted 340, 310, 338, basically 340, 346, basically 350, 316, and then 298, basically 300, back to back years. So you'd expect that, like, if he plays 48 games and gets a third of a full season of at-bats, or really a half of a season of at-bats, given how Altuve is trending, you'd expect, like, him to basically at some point, at least have, a period of time where he's hot. Maybe he gets hurt at the end or something. Altuve never had that. Like, he fully looks like somebody who was only above average in any sort of way from cheating. And if the cheating had not been in place, it actually looks like he would have been, like, out of the game a year ago, which is, like, kind of crazy to think that you can just take a guy who makes enough contact and is direct enough to the ball, and if you tell them what pitches are coming, they'll just be 40% above league average every year. It makes me even more angry, to be honest. Like think about that. Like, you could just take anyone. You could literally just take anyone and make them into that kind of player. But then, of course, you get into the people saying that, there's no statistical evidence that it impacted games. As in, like, there's no evidence like saying that if they didn't cheat, that, they would have, won less. No, there's absolutely evidence showing that if they didn't cheat, they would have won less. I mean, we can look at, just what we looked at now. You'd be blind to not recognize the difference. Or we can look into the numbers from that year. That's situational. A lot of people aren't aware that you can do this. If you go onto Fangraphs, which is the best baseball statistics website outside of Baseball Savant, which very few people know how to navigate, and you go into the team statistics, right? Or heck, you could even do this for individual players, but I wouldn't do it for players because players' numbers can fluctuate for drastically different reasons on a year-to-year basis. So I wouldn't really do this for individual players. But if you have players that are functioning off of a system,
wait, but if we're going into Fangraphs and everything,
yes.
Do you want to save that for the next episode?
You know what? Yeah, I think we'll save this for the next episode. This, if you've stuck around, I'm glad. Thank you. But the next episode is going to be if we've given you enough proof to show that the individual players cheated and it affected their numbers and how good they did over the course of a year. This next episode is going to show you how the team used this system when runners were on second, when the game was on the line, to strategically gain advantages over all the other teams, not just that year, the year after, and the year after that. This is how they were able to win all of those tight games, because it's one thing to get what pitch is coming in a normal situation. The game may not be on the line. There might not be a runner on base. You may not need that. And, of course, they're trying to not be detected for what they're doing. So what better time to use a system like that when the other team's so concentrated on what they're trying to do that they won't be aware of what you're trying to do,
Mhm.
They won't be aware that this is when you get your advantage, and honestly, I think it's almost more offensive to use it in a situation like this because they're trying their hardest. So, yeah, we'll save that for the next episode, I guess.
Dude, I love it. I love it. Yeah. So you guys will hear about the proof.
And we'll be here to provide it. See you on the
All
next
right.
one. Like and subscribe.